My name is Courtney O'Neill, and I am enrolled in the ECCE 2116 Math and Science class for the summer 2020 semester. And today I have chosen for my science concept, I've chosen sink or float. Physical properties of objects cause them to sink or float. And the activity I'm going to be doing is called sink or float. Show you my little, there it is, sink or float. For my math, I've chosen to focus on weight, heavy or light, or heavy and light. The activity I'm going to be doing is called, is this heavier or lighter? And we're going to start with the math activity first. So for this activity, it is going to, students should be able to describe objects in terms of weight and compare the weight of two objects to see if they're heavier or lighter. They will also be able, or we're going to be doing an activity that will help them to think about whether items are heavier or lighter, even if they can't see them or touch them physically, but maybe just from a picture or just by them already knowing what an item, what an object is. So we'll be doing a little bit of all of that for this activity. It is a small group activity, so it is planned for, to be with a teacher or a TA or a para, and do small groups during math center time or small group time. And there are two components to the activity. The first is they will use a balance scale, or we will use a balance scale. And I did not have one, but I made one. I have my hanger and my bags. It's the same weight. And so we're going to use this to show heavy and light and test our predictions, our thoughts about if an object is heavier or lighter than another object. The materials we'll need is a balance scale. They will also need all of the items that we're going to be weighing. For this particular activity, we're going to be using a box of crayons, a single crayon, a pencil, 2 dice, a leaf, a bottle of glue, a bottle of water, a book, and I just grabbed a Dr. Seuss book off my shelf. They'll need glue for one part of it. And we're not weighing that, they just will need it. A stapler to weigh, a key, and I already said pencil, so that should be it. So the first part of this activity, they will get a sheet like this, and they'll get pieces. And all of these pieces have a picture of the items that we're going to be weighing. This is the part they'll start out with. The first part will be weighing items and comparing them. I have teacher cards, which has the items or objects that I want them to compare. And so I'll get them in their once they get to their small group, each one of them will get their little card and their pieces. And I'll say, today we are going to see if objects are heavier or lighter. And I'm going to ask them, do you know what weight is? Do you know if something's heavy, does it weigh a lot or a little? If something is light, does it weigh a lot or a little? So there'll be those kind of things. Let them respond. I'll ask them to find their pieces, and I'm going to ask them to first tell me what they think. Do you think that the glue or the leaf would be heavier? So they'll do that, and once they decide, they may go ahead and put their piece and put it in the lighter. I'll show them which one is lighter. So they'll need to understand, I'll tell them for a balance scale that we're going to use, if one side's up and the other's down, the side that's down is heavier, the side that's up is lighter. And I'm going to ask them why before we test it, to see if they, if any of them already comprehend that. So we'd get started, they find theirs, they do their prediction, and so let's just go ahead and do the glue and the leaf. So I would say, let's test this. And I would let them do it. So I would have the first student, usually you're gonna have 4 to 6 in your group. This is for kindergarten. And I did forget to say my standards. I apologize. The Kindergarten Georgia standards that this activity is going to help work toward is MGSEK.MD.1. And they will be able to describe several measurable attributes of an object, such as length or weight. We're doing weight. For example, a student may describe a shoe as, this shoe is heavy, it is also really long. They will be comparing weight today, if it's heavy or light. So, I apologize, I meant to already have said that. So, I'll have the students be able to put the items in the scale themselves. So I'm going to bring my video up here. I wish I had a table balance scale, but I don't. So they'll put them in and drop it in here. And I'll put the leaf in. And then I'll ask which one was heavier and which object is lighter, and let them answer. And we'll talk about why, And so they may answer because the glue's heavier, it weighs more, or it's bigger. And the leaf, they may say it's light as a feather, or it just doesn't weigh as much, whatever the case may be. So we would go through all of the items, and as they do that, they are putting their pieces on their board. So it will look like this. And we would fill up the board. So there's a stapler and the pencil. And we do the crayon and the crayon box. I like that because you may get the answer when you're talking about that. They'll say, well, it's because it's the whole box of crayons, and the whole box of crayons is more than just one crayon. So it's going to be bigger, or it's going to weigh more. So that brings out the more and less aspect in math, or concept in math. Even though that's not our focus, it does bring that into light. So we also have the dice and a water bottle. Each of my cards have this. So we're going to go through and do all of those as we test. We're talking the whole time. Why are 2 dice lighter than a bottle of water? Why is the bottle of water heavier than 2 dice? There's 2 dice, that's more than 1. So to get them to just critically think about the weight of the objects. It's not that there's more of them, but it's the weight. We'll do that, and for students who need more remediation, this may be the only part of this small group activity that we do. It may be that we test all of these, and then they just may still be struggling. So I would send them, I'd say, okay, Johnny and Rebecca, you go to the dramatic play learning center. Grab an object that you can carry and that will fit in our balance scale. James and Anlin, please go to your desk and grab an object that we haven't weighed yet so that we can see what's heavier and which is lighter. So they'll come back, we'll talk about their items. We would have to maybe ask, let's see, what was I thinking? Oh, well, what do these items have in common? Why is this one heavier? Why is the pencil lighter than the glue stick? And just really pull it out of them. The more they can see it and feel it, have them hold it in their hands and talk about that and describe, how it feels to them. And then, of course, have them test it in the actual balance scale. For the students who do not need any remediation and they are just catching on quickly, we would do the next little step, which is ordering objects, putting them in order from lightest to heaviest. You can see. So I pre-made these little sheets, and they would need a pencil, which we have, and they'd write their name. This is kindergarten, so most of them would be able to write their name. And then they'll have a glue stick, and they have pictures. And on the pictures are objects they aren't going to have in the classroom. We could have a feather, but we don't. So there's a bird, a feather, a key, which we do have a key, an elephant, and a car. And so we would talk about which ones are heavier, which ones are lighter. For example, the elephant and the car. My children, who are all older, say the elephant is definitely heavier than a small car. So we're going to go with that. And all through we would talk about why. So I would say, okay, well, out of all of these, which one's the heaviest? Most of them are probably going to say the elephant. Well, they're going to put the elephant on the heaviest, and we're going to glue it down. And I'll say, which item is the lightest, once we've talked about all of them. And in this case, it is a feather, so pretty much we're going to come to that conclusion. And they will glue that to the lightest. And then we'll fill in between. I'll say, okay, well, out of what we have left, which is a car, and I have my teacher cards actually that I would be using while they are working theirs. And so we would do it that way. So I have my feather, which is lightest, and I would set that on the table for them to see. We're at a small table. And then my elephant. And we have left the car, the key, and the bird. And so they're going to talk about them and say, well, why? And okay, why do you think the car or the bird? And they'll say the car. I'll say, okay, well, what about the key and the car? And they'll say the car. So the car will go next. It'll be next to the heaviest. Well, then we'll just keep going down. I'm sorry, I apologize. We'll actually go up. So the key would go by the feather. So we're going lightest to heaviest. and then the bird is heavier than the key, and then the car is heavier than the bird. And so they'll fill in the ones in the middle and end up with a glued paper that would have them all in order. Sorry. Like that. Okay. Ooh, a videographer would be nice for this. And that would really conclude the activity. They would have a product, obviously. They would put this in their cubby or wherever we put completed work. These are wonderful and reusable. So they would leave those for the next group. And follow-up questions, some of them I've already probably asked throughout, but I definitely want to ask them, what do the heavier items have in common? What do the lighter items have in common? I would ask, especially with our balance test, why, for the lightest to heaviest, why did you decide that the bird was heavier than the key? Or why the feather was lighter than the key? And get their responses. Also, I would ask them, how do you know that objects or animals are heavier than other objects, even when even when they're not in the room with us? So like the car or the elephant, that would just get them thinking. I might even say, well, what about, we're not going to weigh it, it doesn't fit in our scale, but what about our desk or our desk chair, or a lot of kindergarten do have desks, but tables. So I would say probably their chair. Do you think your chair or your lunchbox is heavier? And so we would talk about things that couldn't fit in our balance scale. We went over remediation. I believe that would conclude our small group activity for math. And I will get the science one together. Okay, for our science activity, like I said before, we're doing sink or float. And the kindergarten standard we are going to be working towards is SKP1, obtain, evaluate, and communicate information to describe objects in terms of the materials they are made of and their physical attributes. And it's C, plan and carry out an investigation to predict and observe whether objects based on their physical attributes will sink or float. Materials needed is a clear plastic tub about halfway full of water. The objects that we are going to see if they'll sink or float. We'll be predicting and testing. So this will be a whole group assignment, or activity I should say. And my board up here, I don't have a classroom here with a camera that would reflect it, so I just made it on my whiteboard. And I had some help from my family. They went ahead and predicted what they thought would happen. So we will now test them. So I would let them know each student would have one of these on their desk, and they also have thumbs up with green and thumbs down with the red. I would ask them, at first we would predict. So I'd say we are doing an activity today where we are going to see if objects will sink or float. So we're going to be scientists and we're going to do an experiment. But first, scientists predict or create hypotheses. And I'll say a prediction is what we're going to do. We decide what will happen before we actually test to see if it will happen. I will tell them we'll predict each one together. We already kind of did that on the board, but we would talk about it as a group. And so this one, we've decided to predict that it will float, and so on. So they'll have their predictions, and they will glue. They need their glue stick. That's the other material they need. They'll glue their predictions, because the point is for them to compare their data. They get to see what they predicted, and then they get to see how the test resulted. So let's do the apple, and it floats. So I would come over to my board. I'd say, well, so does it sink or does it float? What is our result? And they would answer. And so I'd say, let's record our data. Why do you think the apple floated? Do you think a banana would? Maybe we can test that one day, and we would discuss. Then we'd keep moving on, test our egg, which sinks. That was what someone in my home predicted. So we would, of course, record that, and so on. Once they do that, they will glue their thumbs up and thumbs down as they go, and that will be their data. We would discuss it. Questions I would ask would be, why did you predict that the spoon would sink, or if something would float? Why do you think the egg sank and didn't float? Why do you think the coin, I think there's a coin on there, why do you think the coin sank? Why do some objects float and some objects sink? So those are the questions that I definitely would want to ask. What do they have in common? We even have an ice cube to test on their little sheet. So when we did and it floats, I might ask them, would it float forever? Would it end up sinking, or would it turn into something else? So that's just some things we would talk about. If children need more support, then doing it as a whole group, they kind of get that support and end up seeing what the results are, and they hear myself and the other children talking about why we came up with the answers that we did. So that alone will be a support or scaffold for those students. There is a small group for an extension. There is a small little group activity they would do independently, so in groups of 3, and they would get little boards that have Velcro and have their thumbs up and thumbs down. I'd split them up into, kindergarten could do groups of 3 to work together. This helps them learn to work cooperatively. They are making predictions, so they'll take their pieces and work together to predict whether these items will sink or float. They'll put their pieces on, and each group will get one of these. Then they will get to test their items in their own small container of water, which I left by the sink, but they would have a smaller container, so about this big, and it is clear as well. So easy for them to see at a table, teacher walking around. If there are students, once they test them, once they test their item, they would then, if they did not predict correctly, they would be able to move or change their piece to a thumbs up or a thumbs down, depending on their results. I may ask them to count how many items they had that floated, and dry erase markers are great for this as an extension, and have them write their number at the bottom. I might ask for how many sank. So that's a counting aspect of it. or component. And if there are students, whenever you do this, I would want to put them in mixed ability groups. So more advanced students, make sure that they're just not all grouped together. Mix it up. Have some students that may need a little more support with some more advanced students. So make sure the groups are mixed abilities. And for those who need even more support than that, then that they would be in a group together with the TA or a teacher table. The point of this is mainly for them to have the hands-on experimenting and seeing it and doing it. The record keeping is great because that's keeping data and recording, but the main purpose is to do this hands-on so that they can see and test their predictions and understand that different attributes, physical attributes of objects, cause them to sink or float. And that is it. Thank you very much.